I gave Bernie the Book of Newry. I said, I think that the style of painting that you have would lend itself to you creating a work out of this. What I want you to do, Bernie, is to create a work that fills a particular space, because I have a room with no real walls in it. It's all glass. It's like a glass box. But there is an 18-inch plinth along two sides of it, and that would be the appropriate place, because the room that it's in also has the feature of having a wonderful view over most of the historic places in Newry, because your work is about depicting people and buildings and places and putting them together in an unusual juxtapositioning, and that's the way in which the book was done. It was people and places all mixed up, not chronologically, but by whatever feature connected them.
This is our first meeting with Michael, and then I would have read the book over and over, and I would have taken details from each chapter, and then I would have gone with the different buildings and the background behind them, and the different things that struck me most in the story. You know, I did have an idea of the chronological story as well. I tend to want to do things starting and working my way through chronologically, as well as the links. As you can see, I've drafted out the various personalities, and I try to make the connections between the different people, you know, and how, for instance, what was connected to a guy called Fagin, the connection with each person historically, and, you know, for instance, myself and my husband went on holidays, and I didn't realise, obviously, the amount of work that was involved. And when you're working with acrylics too, it's a very difficult medium, as I discovered, to work with on a large scale. So anyway, we went away for a holiday anyway, so I brought two of the canvases with me to Tenerife, so my husband constructed a particular box, you know. And so they have been abroad, some of them, these canvases. But I just wanted to really work consistently as much as I could. Now, I did do other projects at the same time, but I just wanted to work on them as much as I could, because it was a long project. It was long, and I wanted to keep them with me. So.
The first thing that hit my mind was historical accuracies and things like that, which occupied my mind when I was doing the book. But when I saw them and I saw how they were mixed up with each other, I said, oh, that's not what it's about. It's not about the historical accuracies. So that was my first reaction. I had to get over that. Also, I suppose the type of inhibition I would have in my own head is dealing with lots of academic people who would maybe put a critical eye on the Book of Newry, saying that it wasn't not an academic work. And I had to overcome that a bit and say, well, I hope they enjoy the fun of this work, because it's actually so amusing how the historical concepts all mix with each other. And then once I went past those bits, I went into the joy of it and saying, oh, this is joyful. And I think, like your reaction to anything, you have to wait until you see the audience. And the first set of people that have looked at it are just so enthralled by the images, and it has led them into asking more and more questions about the actual history behind it, and their sort of revelation to people about everyday things, which is what the book was meant to do. But the book is a hard thing to lift up and flick your way through. But now we've actually achieved what the first objective was, which was to make something visual that people can see all in one glance. They can see all the pages of the book all at the one time. The painting starts with the oldest history that we have, which is the Kilnasaggart stone. It is described as being early Christian, but I believe it's actually late long ago pagan stone, which the Christians draped themselves on, as they did with the pagan religion. And what Bernie has done is capture this idea that I mentioned in the book, that Kilnasaggart was one of the pilgrimage type places that people would have made when they come from the hill of Tara and they were going to Dunseverick at the Giant's Causeway. The next, chronologically speaking, would be two green trees here, which are the yew trees, and the yew trees are the symbol of Newry to this day. The word in Irish, an ewer, means the yew trees, and these yew trees were allegedly planted by St Patrick. So that gives Newry its oldest history as a place itself, as a beginnings of a town. And in below the trees she has painted the Cistercian monastery. And the Cistercian monastery was the original nucleus of Newry. It's where Bagnall's Castle now is. It's why all that area is called Abbey Way. Well, you have done a representation of Dundalk here, which you've taken off the, I think that's called the speed map.
Yeah.
And on his map, Dundalk is actually just drawn as a little square.
And the reason why the link to, again, when you say, Michael, about trying to squeeze everything in, I was very conscious of trying to get a link between not just places but events, and to try in the composition. And if you can see the link, say, from Tara up to Dunseric, that was again that route, and again it went through Moyroy Pass.
Yes.
You know, and again linking in with the Battle of 1598 and O'Neill.
Yes.
Reggie O'Neill. So that's why that's kind of placed there. And trying to, it was quite difficult to actually, the composition, so that there would be
that's
kind
the
of
genius part of it all, Bernie. Don asked me earlier about the reaction. It was my biggest reaction in here was, my God, how did you figure that all out? The idea of composition.
I was conscious that a lot of the development around Newry was based, obviously, the yew trees, yew Kintraw, and the Kintraw would be referenced to at the top of the strand. And the continuum throughout Newry and its development was not just the rivers but canals and water. So that was, and obviously water beside any monastery would have been a vital component. So right through all of the canvases you'll find that there's a steady, it's a kind of a unifying factor. Water, be it a river, the sea, or canals.
After the Normans had settled on the County Down side, they had still great respect for the church and so on, but that respect for the church was lost during the time of Henry VIII. And what you had was a replacement of monastic settlements by secular settlements, whereby the government of the time took away from the church their possessions and gave them to people who either had served the government or who bought stuff off the government. And none more favoured than Nicholas Bagnall, who was the Marshal of the Army of Ireland. He was granted the abbatcy of Newry. And that's an important thing to understand, because Bernie has incorporated here the current modern seal for the city of Newry. And the seal involves a picture of an abbot sitting between two yew trees. And the way in which his ownership was affected was that he was made the abbot. Rather than transferring the lands from the abbot to Nicholas Bagnall became the abbot, even though he was neither a member of the Cistercian order, the Roman Catholic faith. He was become known as the abbot, and that's this day the idea of lay abbots of Newry pertains. And it was a very convenient way of not having to rewrite all the deeds. Over on his left shoulder is a painting of St Patrick's Church, which he built up on High Street, and it was the first Protestant church in Ireland, I would say. I think because everything else was a Catholic church turned into it. It was the first new Protestant church in Ireland. Let's move over to the third panel here. So probably the best place to start on this panel is in the middle of it, where there's a painting by Nixon who painted around about 1800, and it's in the foreground here, and it actually represents the view out of the window of this building in 1800. In the middle of it, well, you have a boat with a sail on it, and there's a little cart with goods in the back of it. Well, that's the Quays, which is now where the Quays shopping centre are. And in the middle of it is a little triangular bank, which is the Green Bank, which gives its name to the area down there of the Green Bank Industrial Estate. Over on the left, it has brought about political and landlordism themes into the one little cameo here. And she has got the recognisable figure of Daniel O'Connell. And below O'Connell is a house which is set at the bottom of the Camlock Mountains, and it's called Heath Hall, and it was occupied by this man on the right who was known as Jonathan Seaver, and he has a terrible reputation because he was so vindictive and cruel during the 1798 rebellion, and he was completely pro-Union. And to the left of him, on the other side of their family house, is his son, who actually became one of the greatest supporters against the Union, supporting Daniel O'Connell.
And that's the building, obviously the architect Watson.
That's Watson, the architect, designed the hotel for the railway company at the time.
Yeah.
But you've all the little streetscape done as well, right away up to the far end.
Beautiful building, actually. And again, the Moor Mountains would be the backdrop.
Oh, yes, up by Rostrevor, up that part,
Yeah.
And then that's Slieve Martin you have up there.
Yeah.
Above the head of the man who reminded me of myself with the bald head, John Grubb Richardson.
Yeah.
Well, the first thing he did was he built a model village, and you have replicated the model village, where they had the no peas, no pub, no police, and no pawnbrokers.
And I thought no pottery neither, probably.
I probably know you wouldn't have any potching, no pub. Maybe loads of potching because of no pub. Now we'll go to the fourth canvas, and what catches my eye on this, and anybody that comes in, is this space going up to Trevor Hill, because it's so recognisable, and most younger people say, "Oh, the Bank Bar."
Yeah.
Well, in actual fact, it was a Northern Bank was there at one time. Yeah. To the left of it, there's a very distinctive building which people call the Parochial Hall, but it has a great history because that wasn't built as a hall at all. That was built as the offices for a merchant in the town called Henry Thompson, who was very famous whenever I was a child. Even Henry Thompsons were the biggest importers for rum and so on in the north of Ireland. Yeah. What I really love about this is people around here have no idea of the place names, etc., and never stop to question that that's called Trevor Hill.
Yes.
But it's as flat as a pancake.
Yeah.
There's no hill.
Yeah.
And what I'd really love to do is to jump forward and say, "Are you looking at Trevor Hill?" And then say, "This is Trevor Hill," and point at the man on the white horse, which is a slight historic inaccuracy because it's not Trevor Hill, but it's the son of Trevor Hill.
Yeah.
And Trevor Hill and his son developed all the inner parts of Newry. And you've encapsulated a whole lot of the bits of the life of John Mitchell here.
Well, again, I think John Mitchell and John Martin, because their lives were so intertwined, and because they played such an integral part, and a high-profile part in Irish history, that I wanted again to illustrate their connections, and I suppose the mutual pursuits and the mutual parts of their lives. So there you had John Mitchell and his jail journal, and I just want to illustrate again
he's got his elbow on the jail journal.
The jail journal,
a wee bit like O'Neill had his elbow on Mabel's Tower. In fact, that's taken from a classical image of Mitchell that was sold as a poster in the US in the 1850s, where he had this scroll representing the newspaper, the United Irishman. Of course, it was a big broadsheet newspaper, but that's the way they artistically displayed it.
Yeah.
And the crest between the two of them there.
Again, they were both involved in the Young Irelanders, and I wanted to illustrate that. And then at the background, then they were both obviously sent to Tasmania,
which is a little yellow house with a tin hut on it, in Nant Cottage.
And because they'd spent a lot of time there together.
They were,
They were both also members of Parliament, so
eventually. Martin was for much longer than Mitchell. And over the head of
Drumlin House
is the house where they both died in within a week of each other.
Yeah. And then just a little reference to John Mitchell's involvement with the Confederates.
Oh yes,
the time he spent in America as well, obviously.
Well, he lost 2 sons in the Confederate War, and one of the sons had his arm blown off. He himself was the propagandist for the Confederacy.
Yeah.
The first noticeable thing is Drumlin Mill with this big chimney, well known to people who go to the Quay shopping centre. Drumlin Mill was famed because it had the most modern machinery put into it. Coincidentally, was designed by John Mitchell's brother Willie, and the business went broke after a few years because it spent so much on that building. The next thing that catches the eye is this man with the big wig.
Lord Russell of Russell of Cologne. I mean, a really incredibly dynamic man, an incredible man, and in fact from an incredible family. He was the first Catholic Lord Chief Justice of England, and a very good man. As I was reading about him, I was absolutely fascinated with his life story. I just liked the story, obviously, where he defended Parnell. And I just wanted, I mean, it's a sort of a cartoon figure of Pigott, but I just wanted to get some, and again, the internet was fantastic.
Pigott wrote a set of letters and forged Parnell's name on them to say that he was supporting the armed rebellion. Isn't that what it was?
That's right. Yeah.
And then they were published in the London Times, I think it was.
Yeah.
So Parnell then had to take a libel case against the Times, and that's where Russell came to his greatest prominence as a lawyer.
That's taken from an old photograph of the Newry station. Again,
which one is the Newry? Which one is it? The London Bridge or the Dublin Bridge station?
I think that's the Dublin Bridge station.
Dublin Bridge station. The next part, my eye goes up to a sailing ship in full sail, which I really love because, as you know, one of my passions is about the Carville family, and this is a representation of the Lady Caroline on its way to New Brunswick.
That's it, yeah.
And what you were telling me, you went and checked what
New
Brunswick looks like
what
from
New
the
Brunswick,
sea.
again from around that time. So again, it's just a little minuscule representation of maps and charts again that I got on the internet, and that would be sort of what it looked like around the time.
And then down below it there, I'm intrigued at this. It looks like.
Okay, well then we move into maybe later on around the time of the famine and the emigration to actually Liverpool. A lot of Irish people would have emigrated to Liverpool as well.
Right.
And I just had I wanted a representation of an image of Liverpool again around that time. So that's the Liverpool.
And that's it going right round underneath the sailing ship.
And that would be the type of sailing ship. And then we have the which I particularly enjoyed doing because I love Harry Clark. I didn't realise you have one little frame in the book, but I didn't realise it was actually a beautiful larger window when I went up to the bishop's house.
Did you go up to the house yourself?
Oh, I did, yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Well, I wanted to see. I just wanted to get more detail, but when I went and saw the extent of the window, now I love Harry Clark, so that was a pure joy now to try to represent.
There's very few people in Newry know that there is a bishop's house or where it is, but it's up on the entrance as you go into St Coleman's College. Yeah. And you did that. And then, for some reason or another, unsolicited by me, you decided to put the patrons in.
Well, why not, Michael?
And why not?
And why not? And the two books.
And the two books. Now, what we should have done is put the two books and a little cameo of the whole of the painting, Bernie. We should have put that in as well. Compress the whole 24 foot down into a little couple of inches there behind us.
I think I've been able for that, Michael. I don't think so.
I might as well call this the Painting of Newry. It's not a tapestry, so it's the Painting of Newry. I don't think it'll be surpassed. There's no one, I've often said about the book, there's no one going to sit down and do another book of Newry. There's no one going to sit down and do another one of these.